June 22, 1941. Eastern Poland. Dawn. The horizon burned orange with artillery flashes. The sky trembled as 3 million German soldiers surged eastward in Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's grand gamble. Columns of Panzers roared down cracked Soviet roads, treads grinding, engines growling like metal beasts. Officers rode high in half-tracks, faces lit by the sunrise and the fire of burning frontier posts. The Wehrmacht believed this campaign would last only months. "Russia is a rotten house," one lieutenant sneered. "Kick the door, and it will collapse." By midday, Luftwaffe bombers pounded Minsk and Białystok, turning airfields into smoking wastelands. On the ground, Panzer III and IV tanks sliced through the Red Army's first lines. Soviet T-26s and BT-7 South thinly armored relics burst into flames under German shells. Each victory radioed back to headquarters reinforced the illusion: the Red Army is finished. As dusk fell, German tank crews relaxed around field stoves, boasting over their cigarettes. One captain from the 7th Panzer Division laughed as he inspected a captured Soviet tank. "Look at this," he said, tapping its armor plate. "Bolts, not welds." "It's a tractor, not a tank," his men laughed. The Soviets, they thought, were fighting with toys. But among the intercepted transmissions and broken Red Army lines, reports began surfacing of something different, something new. Units near Grodno and Lipol spoke of unknown heavy tanks that could withstand direct hits. The descriptions were inconsistent. Some claimed they were KV-1 South, others something smaller, but just as deadly. Commanders dismissed them as exaggerations. The offensive pressed on deep into Belarus and beyond. The Wehrmacht, emboldened and ruthless, drove forward through forests and swamps. But somewhere beyond the Dive River, in the smoke and mud, something was waiting. July 10, 1941, near the town of Ostrov, Northwestern Front. The morning was heavy with fog and the smell of pine. Captain Hans von Holland, commanding a Panzer, the 3rd Platoon, watched his formation roll out across an open field. His orders were simple: flush out a retreating Soviet column and secure the crossroads. The operation should have been routine. But halfway through the advance, the first shell struck. A deafening clang rattled his turret. "Incoming fire!" "From the tree line," shouted his gunner. Von Holland swung his binoculars toward the forest and froze. Out of the mist came shapes unlike anything he'd ever seen. Broad, squat, and low like predators. Their armor shimmered with dew, their turrets sloped backward. They weren't KV-1 South. They weren't anything in German intelligence reports. The gunner fired 37mm armor-piercing rounds. Sparks, smoke, nothing. The shells ricocheted harmlessly, bouncing off as if the tank were made of stone. "Impossible," von Holland barked. "Hit it again, but it didn't matter." The enemy returned fire, and one of his panzers erupted in flames. As the German formation broke, the new tank's T-34s charged forward. Their diesel engines thundered, treads churning through mud that bogged down German tanks. Von Holland watched as his men abandoned their vehicles, running under machine gun fire. The Soviets moved with terrifying ease, their sloped armor deflecting shots that would have torn any panzer apart. When the battle ended, the Germans recovered what was left of their dead and machines. Von Holland approached one of the wrecked T-34s. The armor was pitted with impact marks, but barely pierced. He ran his gloved hand over it, silent. "It's like it was forged for war itself," he muttered. Word spread quickly through the ranks. Something had shifted. For the first time, the Wehrmacht had met a machine it couldn't dominate. July 1941. Army Group Center Headquarters, Smolensk. Reports arrived in thick envelopes stamped Geheim Classified. Each one told the same story. New Soviet tank impervious to 37mm fire. Panzers ineffective against medium armor. Recommend immediate escalation of anti-tank measures. German officers crowded around the maps, disbelief on their faces. Major General Hermann Hoth read the summaries aloud. "Our Panzer III cannot penetrate at any range," he said grimly. The T-34 outpaces us in mud, snow, and firepower. The room fell silent. Colonel Friedrich von Nellenthen scribbled in his notebook, "The Russians have built a tank superior to ours. We underestimated them." Meanwhile, in the field, tank crews adapted desperately. They learned to aim for weak points, the turret ring, the tracks, the rear engine deck, but even those were hard to hit in the chaos of combat. Soviet tactics were crude but effective. Hit fast, retreat into forests, and appear again miles away. Captured T-34s were hauled back to German workshops for analysis. Engineers stared at the sloped armor, muttering to themselves. "It deflects incoming rounds, simple physics," one whispered. "And these wide tracks perfect for mud." To them, it was both genius and humiliation. The laughter that once followed Soviet machinery was gone. In its place, respect and fear. The ground froze solid as winter closed in. The T-34S thrived in the snow where German Panzers froze in place. While German engines choked and cracked, the T-34s moved smoothly, their diesel engines roaring through blizzards. Soviet counterattacks slammed into exhausted Wehrmacht lines. At one command post near Klin, German officers stood over a destroyed Panzer IV, its turret blown clean off. A T-34 had hit it from over 800 meters. "How do you fight that?" one asked bitterly. The realization had fully set in. The myth of German armor superiority was broken. December 5, 1941. Northwest of Moscow. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains. The temperature had plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius, freezing oil in the barrels of rifles and stiffening canvas uniforms into armor of ice. The Wehrmacht's summer uniforms were useless now, their fuel reserves nearly gone. Engines sputtered and died along the frozen road to Klin. Lieutenant Karl Becker stood beside his immobilized Panzer III, breath crystallizing in the air. "Scheiße," he muttered, kicking the tread. His driver shook his head. Nothing could make the machine move. Then, through the white blur of the snowstorm, came the low rumble of engines. Not German ones. The Soviets were counterattacking. A formation of T-34s rolled across the frozen plain like iron ghosts. Their wide tracks cut cleanly through the snow. Their engines, diesel, not gasoline, roared steadily, unaffected by the cold. Becker's men opened fire. The shells bounced again, glancing off sloped armor that seemed to defy logic. "They don't stop," someone screamed. "They don't stop." The Soviet tanks broke through the lines, crushing trenches, scattering infantry. For the first time since the invasion began, German soldiers fled. The retreat was not orderly. It was chaos. The Panzers were powerless, the Luftwaffe grounded by snow, and the myth of invincibility shattered. At headquarters, reports of total collapse filtered in. Field Marshal von Bock slammed his fist on the table. "These tanks, how do they move in this?" he demanded. "How do they not freeze?" No one had an answer. All they knew was that the Red Army had found its equalizer, the T-34, and Germany's Blitzkrieg had met its match in the Russian winter. February 1942, Kammersdorf Proving Ground, Germany. The captured T-34 stood in the middle of the testing range, half covered in soot and snow. Around it, German engineers and officers circled like surgeons around a patient. They were silent, humbled, their breath steaming in the cold morning air. Dr. Ferdinand Porsche tapped the hull with a wrench, listening to the metallic ring. "Sloped armor," he murmured. "A brilliant simplicity. Every shell deflects off at an angle." Next to him, Heinrich Niepkamp, one of Germany's top designers, nodded. "And these tracks wider than ours. They glide over mud. We designed for France. They designed for hell." The officers nearby exchanged uneasy looks. "Our intelligence called them primitive," one said quietly. "Primitive. And yet they built this." Within weeks, sketches for a countermeasure began filling the tables at the Henschel and Mann factories. The words Panther and Tiger appeared in notebooks, names destined to become legends of their own. But the rush to compete brought its own problems: over-engineering, complexity, and production nightmares. Germany would spend years chasing a design the Soviets had achieved with brutal efficiency and simplicity. The T-34 had forced the Reich to rethink war itself. Its influence was absolute. Summer 1942, near Kharkov, Ukraine. The steppe shimmered with heat as German forces launched their renewed offensive toward Stalingrad. Thousands of tanks rolled across the plains, dust cladding the sky. The Wehrmacht had rearmed Panzer IVs now carried long-barrel 75mm guns, more capable against Soviet armor. But the Red Army had learned too. Their factories in the Urals, Chelyabinsk, Nizhny Tagil, were working day and night, churning out thousands of T-34s, every one of them identical, every one built for survival. As the Germans advanced, they faced an endless tide of green-painted steel emerging from the haze. At Kharkov, the two titans met again. The Germans fought with precision and coordination. The Soviets fought with numbers and resilience. A German tank commander described the horror in his diary. "We knocked out 5, 10, 20 T-34s, but for every one destroyed, 3 more appeared." It was like fighting the earth itself. As the battle raged, Soviet crews often fought to the death, their tanks catching fire and continuing to move. German soldiers began whispering that the Russians had no fear that they were possessed. But the truth was simpler. The T-34 gave them hope. For the first time in the war, they could look at a German tank and know they could win. November 1942. Stalingrad. The city was nothing but rubble and smoke. Streets had no names anymore, just coordinates on a map. The Volga froze over as Soviet reinforcements crossed under fire, their columns of T-34s crawling through the ruins like beasts of burden. German troops, exhausted and starving, watched in disbelief as the tanks kept coming through the snow, through the debris, through the fire. Each one carried not only shells, but morale. The Red Army's doctrine had evolved. Tanks no longer advanced alone but in waves, supported by infantry and Katyusha rockets. When the encirclement finally closed around the German Sixth Army, Soviet armor sealed the ring. The trap was complete. The Wehrmacht's most powerful force was now frozen in place, unable to break through. Hitler demanded they stand fast. But no tank could save them, not here, not against the tide of steel. As the battle ended, a Soviet mechanic wrote home. "They said our tanks were crude, but those crude machines carried us to victory." July 1943, Kursk, the greatest tank battle in history, was about to begin. The fields around Prokhorovka were alive with the sound of engines, German Panthers and Tigers, freshly rolled out of factories, ready to prove themselves. Their armor was thicker, their guns longer. The T-34 would finally meet its challenger. At dawn, the steppe erupted. Shells shrieked overhead as thousands of tanks clashed in a single thunderous storm. Panthers burst into flames, Tigers jammed in the mud, and T-34s swarmed like wolves, darting between giants. The Soviets fought not with superior machines, but superior will. When the smoke cleared, both sides had suffered immense losses, but Germany could not replace theirs. The Soviet factories, untouched beyond the Urals, built more. The T-34 was everywhere. It became not just a weapon, but a symbol of industrial might and defiance. By the end of Kursk, the momentum had shifted forever. The Wehrmacht would never again go on the offensive. May 1945, Berlin. The city was unrecognizable, an ocean of ruins beneath a blackened sky. Among the shattered stones and burned-out shells of the Reichstag, T-34s rolled across the cobblestones, their red stars gleaming with dust. For the German soldiers who survived, the memory of 1941 haunted them, the laughter, the arrogance, the disbelief. They had mocked the Soviet tank, called it crude, primitive, backward. Now it stood before them, engines idling in victory. In 6 years, the T-34 had gone from a curiosity to the backbone of the Red Army's triumph. Over 50,000 were built, each one a statement of endurance, simplicity, and purpose. It had outlasted every rival design, inspired new generations of tanks, and rewritten the art of armored warfare. When the war ended, German officers wrote in their reports with bitter respect, "The T-34 is the most outstanding tank of the war." Its appearance marked the end of German superiority, and so the tank once ridiculed by its enemies became the machine that shattered their empire. Its rumble echoed from Moscow to Berlin, reminding the world that sometimes the simplest design can change the course of history.